In 1865, a German chemist named Justus von Liebig sold the first commercial infant formula as a powder mixed with cow's milk. Parents called it a scientific miracle. Within 50 years, it had helped kill thousands of babies. Today, infant formula sits on grocery shelves in pastel containers, regulated by government agencies, tested in laboratories, and recommended by pediatricians when breastfeeding isn't possible. It carries nutrition labels, preparation instructions, and reassuring brand names. Most people assume it has always been a safe, scientifically designed product, a backup plan invented by modern medicine. That assumption is wrong, and the distance between what formula promised and what it actually delivered is not a minor historical footnote. It is a story about marketing outrunning science by at least a century, and about who paid the price when it did. Before commercial formula existed, the historical record shows only two options: a mother's milk or a wet nurse. When neither was available, families used animal milk, usually from cows or goats, sometimes diluted with water or thickened with bread. The mortality rate for infants fed this way was catastrophic. In 18th century foundling hospitals across Europe, where wet nurses were scarce and animal milk was the default, infant death rates reached 70 to 90%. The need for something better was not invented by industry. The need was real, urgent, and documented across generations. The solution would prove far worse than the problem it claimed to solve. Liebig's formula was not designed to save poor children. It was marketed to wealthy families who wanted a modern, scientific alternative to the ancient practice of hiring wet nurses. The powder contained cow's milk, wheat flour, malt flour, and potassium bicarbonate. Liebig claimed it replicated the chemical composition of human milk. It did not. The formula lacked essential fats, contained no vitamins, and required preparation steps that most households could not perform safely, because sterilization as a practice was barely understood at the time. But it carried the authority of a famous chemist's name, and in the mid-19th century, that was enough to move product. By the 1870s, dozens of competing formulas flooded the market. Henri Nestlé launched his own version in Switzerland. American companies followed. Some products contained condensed milk, others used sugar and flour as thickeners, and a few included opiates to keep babies quiet through the night. None were tested for safety, none were regulated, and none came close to the nutritional profile of breast milk because the analytical chemistry needed to define that profile did not yet exist. The companies were not filling a scientific gap. They were racing into a commercial space before anyone had the tools to audit their claims. The marketing was relentless. Advertisements appeared in newspapers and women's magazines, claiming that formula was purer than breast milk, easier than hiring a wet nurse, and evidence of a well-managed modern household. Doctors endorsed products in exchange for payments. Free samples were distributed in maternity wards. The companies did not mention rising infant mortality rates in formula-fed populations because they did not track them. What they tracked was sales. By 1900, the death toll was undeniable. In American cities, infants fed on commercial formula died at 2 to 3 times the rate of breastfed infants. The cause was not the formula alone. It was the combination of incomplete nutrition, bacterial contamination from unsterilized bottles, and municipal water supplies that carried typhoid and cholera. Formula required boiling water, sterilized glass bottles, and reliable refrigeration, infrastructure that most urban tenements and rural homes simply did not have. The babies who died were disproportionately poor, but the formula had originally been designed for the wealthy. The market had expanded downward. The safety infrastructure had not followed. The companies blamed the mothers. Advertising began to shift its language. Instead of promising convenience, formula was now marketed as a medical necessity for women who were too nervous, too ill, or producing milk that was somehow nutritionally insufficient. The rhetoric invented a medical problem and then sold the solution. Public health campaigns tried to counter the messaging by promoting breastfeeding, but they were outspent and outmaneuvered at nearly every turn. Regulation came slowly and painfully. The United States did not require formula manufacturers to list ingredients until 1938. Standards for vitamin and mineral content were not established until the 1970s. In the intervening decades, the companies experimented on the market directly. Some formulas contained too much salt, leading to hypernatremia and brain damage in infants. Others lacked vitamin E, causing anemia. One soy-based formula in the 1970s omitted chloride entirely, resulting in metabolic alkalosis and developmental delays in hundreds of infants before it was recalled. Each disaster produced incremental reform. None produced a full reckoning with the underlying pattern. The most aggressive marketing eventually moved overseas. In the 1970s, formula companies targeted low-income countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, with free samples distributed through hospitals and advertising campaigns that implied formula was superior to breast milk. The strategy assumed that mothers who received free samples would continue purchasing formula after those samples ran out, and that by then their own milk would have dried up from disuse. The calculation was correct. But in regions without reliable clean water or the household income to purchase adequate quantities of formula, mothers diluted the powder to make it last longer. The result was malnutrition and diarrheal disease at a scale that public health officials struggled to measure accurately. The World Health Organization linked unsafe bottle feeding practices to roughly 1 million infant deaths per year during this period. That figure did not appear in any formula company's annual report. In 1981, the World Health Assembly adopted the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, which restricted advertising, prohibited free samples in hospitals, and banned health claims on formula packaging. The United States was the only country to vote against it. Compliance with the code was voluntary. Violations were common. Follow-up studies conducted through the 1990s and 2000s found that formula marketing in low-income countries continued largely uninterrupted, often channeled through doctors and health workers who received payments or gifts from manufacturers. The companies called it education. Investigators called it a continuation of the same strategy under different paperwork. Modern formula is technically unrecognizable from Liebig's original powder. It contains proteins, fats, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals in ratios refined by decades of clinical research. It is regulated, tested, and continuously reformulated as new studies identify nutritional gaps. Soy-based formulas now exist for infants intolerant of cow's milk protein, though those formulas carry their own documented complications. Soy protein inhibits iron absorption, and phytic acid, a naturally occurring compound present in soybeans, blocks it further. Manufacturers compensate by fortifying soy formula with additional iron and sometimes encapsulating the iron compound to prevent it from turning the formula visibly dark. The science has genuinely improved. That is worth stating plainly. What did not improve at the same rate was accountability. In wealthy countries, formula is now a regulated and sometimes essential product. In lower-income markets, it remains a product that carries risk disproportionate to the populations being targeted. The same companies that once attributed infant deaths to mothers who could not follow instructions now sell fortified products in markets where refrigeration is irregular and safe water is not guaranteed. The deaths that result are harder to count today, dispersed across supply chains and officially attributed to poverty rather than to product. But the underlying mechanism has not fundamentally changed. A family buys what it can afford, dilutes it when money runs out, and hopes the child survives the gap between what the label promises and what the household can actually deliver. The formula on a shelf today is not the villain of this story. It is the current endpoint of a system that began by prioritizing commercial authority over safety, then invented medical problems to expand its markets, and treated generations of infants as an unregulated test population across more than a century of incremental disasters. The science eventually closed most of the nutritional gaps. The accountability for what happened before it did has never fully arrived. Every container carries that history, whether the label mentions it or not. And knowing that history does not make the product less necessary, it makes the continuing gaps harder to excuse.